Hey, everybody. This is Dr. William Clark again for another edition of Leadership Conversations. I'm happy to be joined by Dr. Wesley Proctor. And today we're going to be talking about nonprofit startups, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I wanted to bring Dr. Proctor on for a leadership conversation about nonprofit organizations because he is an expert in helping nonprofit organizations get off the ground and figure out ways to operate, and definitely want to give him a platform to share some of the best practices that he is utilizing in advising nonprofits and across the country, I would say. So, Dr. Proctor, before we get started, I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself and to give some background information about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Clark. I'm Dr. Proctor. I am the Executive Administrator and Youth Pastor at Victory Christian Center of Philadelphia, located in Southwest Philadelphia in the city of Brotherly Love. I also teach nonprofit administration at the University of Pennsylvania, Nutter's Institute of Community Partnerships, and I've been teaching it for 16 years. In addition to that, I also help nonprofit organizations with all of their paperwork, from the employer identification number to filing their articles of incorporation, and also receiving their letter of determination from the IRS, which is their 501c3. Done hundreds of them, probably over 500 of them, maybe more. And I enjoy doing them.
Wow. So let's kind of jump into the conversation. How do you define nonprofit leadership in today's time where fiscal challenges exist? There's overcrowding of nonprofits in the marketplace. How would you contextualize nonprofit leadership with that backdrop?
Contextualizing it, I would have to say that nonprofit leadership has to start with a passion for those who are connected to the organization, the nonprofit organization. For example, if your nonprofit organization's mission or vision is to help the homeless or to give away things charitably, you have to have a passion for that, because that passion is going to drive you to take some initiative in leadership and starting your organization, and not just starting it, but actually seeing it through. And I think when individuals or boards start nonprofits, that passion has to exude not just from the person that started it, but from the board that's helped driving the mission. Because it's not about the individuals who are starting the organization, but it's about its mission.
Do you see situations where you have an excited individual or executive director, but the board or the people who may be involved may not be equally engaged or excited about the purpose of what's going on?
Most definitely. I see it all the time. And that is one of the challenges that most EDs face, because initially they start off with that excitement, and then somewhere down the road, the excitement kind of wanes a little bit. So it is a challenge for EDs to find board members or workers that are excited as they are about the mission and vision. So the challenge is keeping that excitement going in the midst of when challenges are facing. So I would have to say yes.
So what about the person that's watching who has already started their organization, they already have an infrastructure in place, and yet they're struggling with connecting their board to the mission or connecting the board to the nuts and bolts of what makes the nonprofit go? How do you advise them to get those people reinvigorated and re-excited about the bigger mission, which is in play right now?
Something I just ran a workshop on understanding the role of your nonprofit board members, as a matter of fact, on this past Saturday. And one of the things that I talked about is having that one-on-one dialogue with board members, really getting their sense outside of the board meeting where their commitment is, the things that they think went well for the year for the organization versus what didn't, asking them for their suggestions, and really seeing where they are in their level of passion and their level of commitment. So I think the individual touch and the personal touch between the ED and that board member would really solidify and answer a lot of the questions that they may have about the board member being committed. But I think that's important as well. just meeting with them and talking with them and finding out where they're at, because it may not be the mission of the organization. They may be going through something personally and they may not have a chance to talk about it, or it may be something that they didn't understand that the ED could clear up. But I really think that a conversation needs to be had, and then you could just take it from there.
Why do you think, what in terms of your experience and what you've seen and what you are seeing, why are so many people creating nonprofits? Why do they feel like that's the path forward to express their passion?
I think we're in a time where our society is just facing so many negative issues, and individuals are really seeing a need to make our society better in some way. And that some way could be tied to their passion or their mission, their passion of their organization, whether it's helping the homeless, whether it's giving away book bags, whether it's speaking to young people. People are beginning to step out on what they're most passionate about. And that passion just happens to be connected to addressing some of the issues that are plaguing our society. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot of rise in the formation of nonprofit organizations.
But do you think that we've created an environment that is overcrowded and oversaturated with too many nonprofit organizations, or too many faith-based organizations, or too many NGOs that are flooding the market looking for resources, looking for support, looking for board members?
Yes and no. That might sound a little weird, but yes and no. I think it's a good thing for an individual to step out and to demonstrate what they're passionate about, because when individuals do that, they're really taking a leap of faith, and oftentimes if you don't do anything, you don't know what could be. And I think oftentimes when people do that and they start organizations or they go out and demonstrate what they're passionate about, oftentimes it brings out other talents and skill sets in that individual that they might not have known were there. Do I think there's a flood of nonprofit organizations and us all vying for different resources? Yes. I do think there should be more collaboration because some of our mission and visions are the same. I do think one nonprofit could probably help another nonprofit because they may have more resources than the other nonprofit. And I think if we have as a best practice more collaboration, more partnerships, more utilizing other nonprofits in the pool of their resources, we could really be more effective.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. What type of mistakes are you seeing people make in nonprofit leadership as they get going and as they get the nonprofit?
I see initially not being clear on their mission or vision of what they want the organization to accomplish. For example, I have many clients come in and say, hey, I want to help veterans get back on their feet. And then, I want to start my paperwork. They get their paperwork going. And then now, once they have the paperwork going, they're like, okay, Dr. Proctor, what do I do next? I'm like, you got to go out there and start fulfilling your mission. If it's veterans you're targeting, you have to go out and start looking for veterans. Then when they go out looking for veterans, they discover that this is not exactly what they thought it was going to be, because starting an organization is a lot of groundwork. It's hard. You got to beat the pavement. No one's just going to come knock at the door and say, hey, we got a $10,000 grant for you. You got to do some programming. You got to have outcomes that are measurable. You got to be doing it for a long period of time before you can actually see some tangible results. And I think oftentimes when people start organizations, they want the results to be fast, and it's not always that way. So that is one major mistake I see. And then, organizations begin to change their mission and vision as they go along. And I think that's natural because oftentimes when you start a thing, you typically discover what you really are called to do or you like to do as you're doing different things. I don't think you walk into it just knowing. You sort of discover it. So those two things I can definitely say. The timepiece and them changing their mission and vision over time. And then people get discouraged once they get the paperwork done and they go out there and it's not what they thought it was going to be. They just put the organization down, don't meet with their board members, and they let it stay dormant. and let life overtake them with the different day-to-day stuff, and they never pick it back up. And I think doing that can cause a person or organization to lose its passion.
So for the nonprofits that are 2 to 5 years old, meaning that they've received their paperwork and they've had it for between a 2 to 5 year period, what challenges are you seeing that those organizations are facing during their phase of their growth and development?
Funding is a major issue. I'm sure you could attest to that. Resources, the lack of resources. And I think the under resources, I would say measurable outcomes. Their programming, really having an identifiable program or service that they could keep at for a period of time where there are measurable outcomes. And again, going back to my previous point, it really takes a while, that 2 to 5 year window. You're really discovering and you're really trial and erroring a lot of the programs and services that you're providing, and you're really discovering what works versus what doesn't work. So in that, you're going to really run into a lot of pitfalls and challenges of, not having enough people show up at the meeting. Do I still go on? I thought this event was going to be successful and it's not. I got to put my own money into this. But the passion that you have, and this is what I tell my clients all the time, has to drive you to do what it is that you're doing, regardless of what the outcome is. And that sounds crazy, but you have to believe in it enough to know that the outcomes are going to be favorable. They're going to increase over time, and it's going to be something that can be measurable, because really you're operating off of passion. You're really operating off of passion until those doors of opportunity open up.
At what point does passion run out and someone needs to make the hard decision to shut down a nonprofit or change course or make a different decision?
That's a tough question. I would have to say it depends. It depends on your board. If you have a strong board, your board can typically carry you when your passion runs out. And the board will pretty much pick up the vision and put in other resources in place to carry it and work through your passion not being there. And sometimes you may just need a period away from it. Sometimes you may need to just let somebody else run it while you get a rest. But I think that's a decision that has to be collective between the board and the ED as they're running it. But I do think it depends on the people that you have in your circle and the people you have on your board. That would really determine the organization.
If you could summarize the top 2 or 3 leadership skills needed to run a nonprofit today, what would you say are those top 2 or 3 skills that you just got to have as a nonprofit leader?
Number 1, you have to be resourceful. You have to
I think we lost Dr. Proctor there. Okay, we're trying to get Dr. Proctor and Rashim to jump in there. Rashim, hey, oh, you're driving. Okay.
Hello.
Hey, Dr. Proctor, we had someone jump in the seat. Rashim, your volume is off. I don't know if you have an earpiece plugged in. Yeah, we can't hear you.
Yes, we can't. I can see her, but I can't.
Yeah, we can see you, but we can't hear you. Okay. See ya. So, Dr. Proctor, you were telling us about the top 3 leadership skills you think nonprofits need to have.
Yes, and the first one I talked about was being resourceful, not being afraid to tap into other people's or organizations' resources and partnering with them for the better good, for the common goal. The other thing is you definitely need organization. If you don't have it, you definitely need to surround yourself with other people that have organization skills to help push the vision and the mission of your organization. And then the third thing is you need to have good programming. What type of services and programs does your organization offer that will keep people coming back? And that is often a challenge because you're pretty much like a salesman. You're selling the services of your organization, even though it's for the common good of society. I would have to say being resourceful, having the organizational skills, and having good programming. Having good programs will be the top three.
I would agree with that. Here's a question that I really want to dig into. What are your clients doing to sustain their nonprofit organizations? What options are they exploring right now?
A lot of options. Some are grants. They're writing for grants. I just had a workshop on basic grant writing, and one of the things I pretty much advised them is to don't be discouraged if you don't get approved for a grant. And if you don't get approved for a grant, go back to the funder and ask them why, and go after the smaller grants. Oftentimes we think because we didn't get the $10,000 grant, but we got 5 $1,000 grants, is better than not getting anything at all. So it's those kinds of things that my organizations that have come under me for the 501c3 are doing. Another thing is programming. Ironically, with all of the workshops and the individuals attending and working in different types of organizations as nonprofits, they're collaborating and beginning to work with each other and exchanging phone numbers and doing programs and services to help each other out. So I really like that. For example, I just got a 501c3 for an organization called the Finest Organization. They do drill team. They go around to various parts of the city, keep the kids out of the street by teaching them drill team. They do step in. They hold community fairs. And another nonprofit that I connected with does positive talks about drugs and alcohol to young people and how not to do it. And those two organizations pretty much came together and planned a festival, which I thought was really nice. And it's coming up in August, and they have about 5 sponsors now, and they've raised close to $8,000 to fund the festival, which I think is really great. And they have another grant that's pending. So it's those kinds of things that I think, a lot of the nonprofits that I'm, beginning to connect with are doing. So, the collaboration and the programming. So,
yeah, I would add to that. In my book, Sustainable, that's being wrapped up right now, we talk about not necessarily specific strategies, but we begin to explore the challenges nonprofits are facing when it comes to funding. And, one of the things that we've observed is that the market is crowded because a lot of people are creating organizational structures around their passions. And this is where nonprofit 501c3 statuses come from. But at the same time, with the flood of these organizations being created, that also shrinks available resources that are able to go to organizations that are capable and have the capacity to execute on agreements that the grantors are giving out. And so in the book, we begin to explore the mindset of what it means to become sustainable, talking about renewable resources. What does that mean for your organization? Talking about leadership, and also talking about innovation. All of that is a combination of things that need to kind of work within a nonprofit organization for it to become sustainable. But we also talk about in the book the importance of this renewable resource piece, right? Because it has to go a step beyond grants. It has to go beyond consideration of smaller grants, right? It has to be a component of your nonprofit that is looking at earned income strategies or acquisition of asset producing strategies, and how those avenues of funding provide much more freedom for your organization than you can ever imagine. I mean, Dr. Proctor, that when you sign on to take on a grant, you're taking on the responsibilities that come with those funds and those resources. And there are quite a few guidelines that you got to honor and respect because it's not your money. But when a
Absolutely.
nonprofit is able to generate its own resources, the freedom of operation, the integrity with which an organization can operate as close to its mission as possible, is much more greater than the opportunities are when you're taking funds from other grantors.
I agree. I agree. And Dr. Clark, it's ironic that you mentioned that as well, because one of the other conversations that I have with my potential clients when they sign on with me is, hey, in the financial section of the 501c3 application, we have to talk about financial sustainability. So if you never get any grant funding, if you never got a donation, how are you going to sustain the programs and services that you have by bringing in other streams of income?
Mm-hmm.
So I do have that conversation with them, and I'm glad you have it in your book as well, because that is a conversation that nonprofits have to have. They need to have other streams of income to sustain the mission and the vision of the organization. So most
So true.
definitely, I do agree with you. Most definitely.
That's so true. We got a few people who are watching. I know Rashim has been coming in and out. Aaron, welcome. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in the seat or to ask a question here on the live chat to us. But Dr. Proctor, leadership is one of those areas where I can go on for days about it. But in the book and the training that will be coming out, we talk a lot about innovation too. One of the things I've struggled with when watching nonprofits operate is that a lot of nonprofits tend to apply innovation in the design of the programming, and I think that's where you were getting at. Having good programming in place is so vital
Yeah.
to any organization. But we begin to push back on a concept of where to apply innovation. Innovation is not just applied to the programming, because that tends to come pretty easy to a lot of folks. But what about the innovation in your back office operations, right? Your IT, your HR, your finance management. Where's the innovation with that? I tend to follow tech trends. I tend to follow startup trends. And a lot of these trends that are happening are things that nonprofits can take advantage of, such as virtual bookkeeping, such as virtual assistants, such as officeless organizations, such as remote hosting and remote IT support. Innovation in those areas that can save tremendous amounts of money, yet keep
Yes.
your organization current. What about a social media person who doesn't have to sit in the office, but who can manage your Twitter account or your Facebook account from a distance? What about gig services, such as services you can purchase from Fiverr or from Upwork or from Guru.com? And again, it's about innovating in ways that can stretch resources, that you talked about, becoming resourceful, thinking about new mechanisms to engage feedback and ideas from people who don't think necessarily like you. We're both from Philadelphia, and it's one thing to have a bunch of folks from the same community versus the same city versus the same tri-state region. How do you diversify that feedback pool or that innovation pool when you begin to look at different mechanisms for innovation? And certainly innovation in revenue generation. A lot of people will say, well, nonprofits can't earn a profit. That's not true.
That's not true.
You
Not
can't
true.
share in the profits, but the nonprofit
Right.
can certainly
Yes, it
earn
can.
profits. How does that change scope? And I'm giving away some of my training here, but when you think about guys like Bill Winston, you think about the amazing things that he's doing. You think about groups like the Urban Affairs Coalition, who has a core mission of helping people and helping urban communities, but certainly they have an earned income mechanism that is tremendous. I worked with them
Yes.
when I was still with the city of Philadelphia. And the work that they're doing, both on the nonprofit and for-profit side, is tremendous, especially with the construction boom happening in Philadelphia. UAC is not in construction, but certainly they are in the mix. And I'll just leave that there. You just got to read the book to understand what they're doing. But again, you think about those concepts that the church and the nonprofit has capacity to be its own entity and to sustain itself without being wholly dependent upon what I call traditional resources.
Yes. And to piggyback off of your point, I think that all goes back to who we surround ourselves with and the resources that they provide. Because I may be the person with the ideal, but I'm not good with IT, or I'm not good at bookkeeping, or I don't know the computer like you know it. I think all of those things collectively go into the success of a nonprofit organization. Just the basic educating yourself and keeping yourself current on the trends and issues that are going on. I think you touched on it very well. I really do. I agree with you 110%.
And here's the thing, Doc. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
You go.
I was just going to say that a lot of people do not realize a nonprofit is a business.
It's a business.
It's one thing to attend conferences that are centered around your area, passion, and focus. It's another thing to attend general business conferences where you're learning new skills. Here's a skill that I think a lot of nonprofits need to learn, and that is a skill of selling and marketing.
Yes.
I mean, when you think about, the question is, well, who? Hey, Dr. Phillip. Dr. Phillip is one of my friends and colleagues who typically joins us for leadership conversations. But selling is a skill that any business owner needs to own. I mean, you're in the business of selling your passion as a nonprofit. Hey, Murad, you're in the business of selling your organization to nonprofits who are looking for funding. You are in the business of selling a lot of things to the community, and it is vital. It is vital to learn selling skills, because without it, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle to find those resources and to find the partners that you need. Dr. Phillip says nonprofits also need to know that they still need to operate like a business. Totally agree, Dr. Foster. Totally agree.
I agree. And I think go back to your point, that's the main issue. You know, when the organizations come to me, they say, hey, I got an idea. I'm going to get your paperwork in order and I'm going to keep you compliant. But it's up to you to run your nonprofit.
That's
and
right.
You have to step out of the context now of it being on paper and make it a reality.
That's right.
And oftentimes that's the challenge with nonprofits, because you want to just do it on paper and you want someone else to come in and do it for you. And like you said, nonprofits think, oh, I'm supposed to give everything away, but I'm not supposed to make a profit. That's not true. And it's business. And transitioning out of that is a challenge for many people who start them up, because that's why they fold. That's why they don't last more than 5 years. That's why they're not consistent in the programming, all because that passion and that willingness and ability to sell what you have is not driving them enough to sustain it. So I agree with you. I agree.
I wanted to share this, and sometimes, Dr. Foster, I say this when we're on a conversation. I try to separate my faith and some of the content we're talking about, but sometimes I just can't help myself. But I rely on scripture to provide practical wisdom in a lot of areas. And this one thing I wrote about in my book, and I it's just one of those things that just kicks me in the butt. But Jesus was teaching a parable in Luke 16 about the dishonest manager. Familiar story. He got fired. He tried to make deals. And I write about that in the book. But here's the one thing that Jesus said in Luke 16:8. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. Get the book when it comes out and you'll understand what I'm talking about. And he says, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you in verse 9, make friends with yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. And I use that text in this book to talk about the importance of resources and how this person, this manager, and the rich man are like nonprofit organizations. They tend to not mind the business or mind the shop. And when things hit the fan, that's when you see nonprofits do things. I mean, I've seen organizations where a grant is due tomorrow. And that's when you see the most energy, you see the most innovation, you see the most creativity. But it's like, tomorrow, why are you putting all this energy out for something that you knew was due months ago? If you read this story, he gets the money back that he lost at the last minute because he didn't want to dig ditches. I'm not going to tell you anymore. Get the book when it comes out. But I'm telling you, nonprofits are the same way. I mean, the rich man is the board, the man that's the manager is the staff, and everybody is last minute. And then he tends to give him a compliment at the end. Listen, the compliments and the pats on the back are great. But if I could add any value to what Dr. Proctor already said, if you're watching this, you got to be on top of your business. You got to be on top of the operation, man.
Got to be.
Because otherwise, your passion just goes up in smoke.
Absolutely. And you got to make sure you have all your
Yeah.
paperwork in order. And people go out with an ideal, and then a potential funder come to you and say, hey, I want to write you a check for $10,000. Do you have your 501c3? Because that funder, that
That's
donor
right.
wants that tax write-off. And if you don't have that 501c3, they're not going to give you that money. They're going to go to another organization that has their stuff together. And it goes back to what Dr. Clark is saying. We got to take care of our business. And that's where I come in. I'm the person that's going to help you take care of your business. I'm the one that helped you set up. I set up Dr.
Several
Clark's
times.
501c3. So he knows.
You know what? Let's talk a little bit about that. You did something for me, and it's not anything special, but you provided your services to me. And I remember when I was referred to you, I was prepared because the person that referred me to you told me it'll take 6 to 8 months. And man, when I tell you I got a turnaround response within a month and a half for my tax exempt status, I was completely surprised, caught off guard. But I would like to think, hey, Dr. Foster, I would like to think there were some early things that I might have done that helped the application, that helped the process. You want to talk about that at all in terms of when submitting a 501c3 application?
Yes, sir. Well, you were definitely a special breed because you handled your business. You talked about everything that you wrote about in your book. You were on top of the process. You communicated with me, and you had the passion for what it was you wanted to do. So it made the process move along easily. So when I asked you for your employer identification paperwork, you were able to provide it. When we went through the articles of incorporation, you went through it with no problem. So it took cooperation on your part to help my job and your tax exempt status go well. So that was a big part of the process. And then I was able to submit the paperwork, and we got a turnaround time, typically 90 days, but you got yours in a month and a half, which is a blessing and a miracle. So I'm really excited about that, and I was really grateful to even work with you on that project.
Amen to that. Dr. Foster, what's going on?
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Good.
How you doing, Dr. Foster?
Wesley, is that your name? I've not met you before.
Yes.
It's nice to meet you. So I've sat on boards and I've done consulting work with not-for-profits, and when you were talking about the energy behind getting a grant done at the 9th hour, if you will, it's ridiculous. I said in the chat side there, many nonprofits have really good hearts and really good ideas when they start, but they have like no concept of what it is to run an organization. And that's why I call it a business. It is a business. It's just a different format of a business. And I was involved in some not-for-profits where, they just didn't even want to move out of that little mom and pop feel, even though that they were big enough to be powerful, and they were dealing with, people that were in poverty. And I'm like, guys, you could be like so much better. You could be commanding $100,000 grants and having buildings and computers and all this stuff. And they were so backwards in their thinking, they couldn't even get together the documents needed to prove that they were a 501c3, even though they were a 501c3 legally.
Wow.
That's right.
Wow.
Ridiculous.
Dr. Proctor, and Philip, me and Philip, Dr. Foster have talked about this on our past couple of shows, but Dr. Proctor, can you talk about the pros and cons of taking your church through the 501c3 status? I know I waffled on that. I eventually did not do it, but what do you have to share about for folks who are thinking about turning their church into a 501c3 organization versus keeping it as a religious, faith-based organization?
Well, the pros of it is that just a couple. A lot of the members, it will ensure them that their contribution to the church are indeed tax deductible, but also it would also, in terms of having the 501c3 as a church, it will allow them to take advantage of the property tax exemption. So if the church acquires land or building in the church's name and it holds the 501c3, you would be able to go after that property tax exemption. Without the 501c3, you couldn't do that. And then there's the con that churches don't want the government in their business or telling them what to do or controlling their money. There's that school of thought as well. But it just depends on how you view it and how you see it. Will determine whether or not you would want to do it.
Well, I can have this conversation much longer, and definitely would love the opportunity to bring you back on Leadership Conversations to talk more about nonprofits. But before we go, do you have a shameless plug you want to put out there for folks on social media?
Yes, if you know, when you come up with your idea for your nonprofit, and before you launch it, please make sure you have your paperwork in order. Please come see me. You can find me on my website at wesleyproctorministries.org. I handle nonprofits all across the country. And please pick up Dr. Clark's book as you're starting your nonprofit so you'll know how to manage it. I think his book would be a great read, and it'll be a great application tool as you're implementing programs and services for your organization.
Great. And my plug is my book, Sustainable, is coming out in the coming weeks. It is coming out with a companion training opportunity as well. We will be making that training available to churches who are starting nonprofits or who are themselves nonprofits or who are looking to explore sustainability options. Again, we don't talk about specific options in terms of what you should do. We talk about what you can do. And we also talk about the infrastructure that's needed to have a sustainable nonprofit or ministry for the long haul. Dr. Proctor just said it. To have the government in your business as a nonprofit is something you got to think about, or as a church, you got to think about, and to ensure your ability to sustain outside of that tax exempt status. We do talk about some strategies to explore. So I will be sharing more about that. And Dr. Proctor, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. It was a pleasure. And I look forward to having this conversation again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And please, listeners, if you're interested in starting a nonprofit, like Dr. Clark said, please reach out to me on my website. All the contact information is there, Wesley Proctor Ministries.
God bless everybody.
.org.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clark.
All right, bye-bye.
Bless you. Bye-bye.